The chamber was a cathedral of cruelty, every wall carved with angular glyphs that proclaimed the power of the Tarkash dominion. Cold light filtered through crystalline beams overhead, casting Marcus Dane in a sickly glow as he hung by his wrists. The chains rattled faintly each time he shifted, a sound so familiar after weeks of captivity that it might as well have been his heartbeat. His once pristine diplomat's uniform was reduced to little more than strips of cloth clinging to a body bruised and worn thin, yet his eyes still carried the defiant gleam that his captors hated. Across the room, High Warlord Zorth studied him with the restrained fury of a predator denied its meal. Zorth's frame was enormous, armored hide glinting with the natural sheen of his reptilian kind. His empire had bent entire civilizations to its will, broken kings, priests, and generals until they prostrated themselves before the Dominion. Yet here stood a single human, fragile by comparison, who refused to bend. The insult gnawed at Zorth's pride with every passing day. "You are a fool, human," Zorth growled, voice like stone grinding together. "The Dominion does not tolerate defiance. Every moment you live is a mercy granted by my patience." Marcus coughed, a dry rattle that scraped his throat raw, but he smiled faintly through the pain. "Mercy? You've got an odd dictionary. If this is mercy, I'd hate to see what you call hospitality." The guards flanking the warlord hissed, claws twitching against their plasma spears. They had grown used to Marcus' quips, but each one still landed like a grain of sand in Zorth's eye. The warlord stepped closer, towering over the chained man, his breath reeking of sulfur and old blood. "You will sign the declaration. You will proclaim before the galaxy that Earth accepts Tarkash dominion. And when your people see you broken, they will kneel." The chains creaked as Marcus shifted upright, forcing his battered body to stand tall despite the agony tearing through his muscles. "Not going to happen. You can parade me, starve me, beat me bloody, but Earth doesn't kneel. I don't kneel. That's the part you thick-scaled bastards don't seem to understand." For a moment silence filled the hall, heavy and sharp. Then Zorth's tail lashed out, striking Marcus across the chest with bone-breaking force. The impact hurled him against the chains, ribs cracking, lungs burning as he gasped for air. He sagged, vision blurring, but his grin returned as blood trickled from his lip. "See? That all you've got?" The guards exchanged uneasy glances. He should have screamed, begged, collapsed. Instead, he mocked the warlord. It was becoming a pattern none of them could comprehend. Even Commander Relker, watching from the shadows, felt a reluctant stir of admiration. Relker was younger than Zorth, his scales still carrying the sheen of untested campaigns. Unlike his leader, he did not mistake cruelty for strength. To him, this human was an anomaly worth studying, though voicing such thoughts would mean death. Zorth snarled, gesturing sharply. The guards dragged Marcus from the chamber, hauling his limp form down corridors of cold iron and stone. They chained him again in the cell that had become both tomb and stage, its walls echoing with every breath. The door slammed shut, locking away both prisoner and legend in the making. Relker lingered near the warlord. "High Warlord, perhaps the human is not the tool we thought him to be. His suffering has not yielded submission. Perhaps another approach." Silence. Zorth's voice was thunder. "You see weakness where I see insolence. He lives only because his defeat must be absolute. A death is fleeting. A broken spirit is eternal." Relker bowed his head, though his mind churned. He had seen broken spirits before, slaves who no longer remembered their own names, generals who begged to wear the Dominion's chains. Yet none had resisted so thoroughly, not even after weeks of torment. What power did this human draw upon? What made him endure when entire species had collapsed under less? In the cell, Marcus pressed his back against the wall, steadying his breath. Every rib screamed, but he refused to let the pain rule him. He thought of home, the smell of rain on city streets, the laughter of his son, the debates in council chambers where words, not chains, had been his weapons. Those memories kept him upright. He whispered to himself, a mantra not meant for ears but for resolve. Endure. That's all. Just endure. The days bled into one another. They paraded him through the capital, forcing him to speak, expecting him to denounce Earth. Instead, he spoke of his people's resilience, their history of war survived, their refusal to die even when the odds were impossible. Crowds gathered, some jeering, others listening in uneasy silence. His captors broadcast his speeches across the empire, intending mockery. But the message carried differently to those who longed for hope. Humans are stubborn, he told them, voice hoarse yet steady. We've been starved, enslaved, burned, and bombed, but we rise. Every time. You think you've broken me, but all you've done is prove you can't. Relker stood at the edge of one such broadcast, listening as Marcus' words rippled through the square. Some aliens spat in disgust, but others looked at each other with uncertainty. The seed had been planted. Later, in the warlord's chamber, Zorath hurled a shattered screen across the floor. They laugh at us. They whisper in the slave pits. His defiance spreads like rot. End it. Kale, the overseer of slaves, stepped forward. His gaunt frame was coiled with venomous contempt. Allow me, warlord. A quiet accident in the pits. No spectacle, just an end to the noise. But Zorath shook his massive head. No. The galaxy must see him broken. His life is my leash on Earth. His defeat will echo forever. Relker clenched his jaw, saying nothing. He had begun to suspect the truth. The human could not be broken. And if that was true, then Zorath's obsession was not strength, it was blindness. In the silence of his cell, Marcus smiled faintly, though pain throbbed through every limb. He knew the warlord's game. They wanted him to serve as proof of Dominion power. But every day he lived, every word he spoke, turned their plan to ash. He was not just a prisoner anymore. He was a weapon Earth hadn't even wielded yet. And somewhere, far beyond these walls, Earth was watching. He had no doubt they would see. They always did. Understood. I'll continue with Section 2 as a seamless narrative in the same tone and style as Section 1. It will deepen Marcus' role as an unbroken symbol, show the growing cracks in the Dominion, and reveal Earth's decision that patience has ended. It will remain within 1,600 words, with no headings and every sentence driving forward character, conflict, or atmosphere. The broadcasts multiplied. What had begun as an act of mockery turned into a contagion of words, carried across the Dominion's worlds by unwilling mouths. Marcus' image, gaunt and chained, flickered on public screens in marketplaces and barracks. The intention had been humiliation, to display the weakness of humanity. But the words he spoke did not sound like weakness. They carried the resonance of conviction, the kind that gnawed at silence and sowed unrest. On the slave world of Gethrin, miners whispered the human's phrases between shifts. Endure, they repeated, not in their own tongue but in his, clumsy and jagged, yet potent. On the frontier outpost of Zebris, soldiers mocked him in jest, imitating his stubborn defiance, yet some found themselves laughing less and listening more. The Dominion, proud and unshaken for centuries, was discovering that resistance could be infectious. High Warlord Zorath raged in his throne chamber. Clawed hands tore gouges into the iron armrests as reports piled upon him. Rebellions were not yet widespread, but the mood had shifted. Fear, once absolute, was faltering. A single human, he spat, voice trembling with restrained fury, a single fragile creature dares corrode the pillars of my empire. This cannot be allowed. Commander Relker stood at the edge of the chamber, silent and observant. He had not spoken his doubts aloud, but he carried them like a hidden flame. Zorath had underestimated the human. Torture had failed. Starvation had failed. And now, the very tool meant to break Earth's spirit had begun to unravel Tarkash order itself. Relker knew the truth Zorath refused to admit. Marcus Dane was not a weakness. He was a weapon. Zorath's solution was escalation. Increase the broadcasts, he commanded. Show him weaker. Starve him further. Strip him of dignity until even his words falter. Kale, the slave overseer, bowed eagerly. Yes, warlord. The spectacle will continue. I will grind the hope from his bones. But Relker's gaze flickered uneasily. Each escalation had produced the opposite effect. The human's body withered, but his eyes remained alight. Every bruise became another testament to endurance, another reason for the enslaved to whisper his name like a prayer. Relker feared that the more Zorath tried to break him, the stronger his legend would grow. In the solitude of his cell, Marcus understood this game as well as they did. Pain was constant now, a tide that never retreated, but he had learned to ride it like a current rather than drown beneath it. When they dragged him into the squares to speak, he used the scraps of strength left to him not to plead, but to remind. You think chains define you, he told them, eyes sweeping across slaves and soldiers alike. But chains only prove your captors fear what you might do without them. Endure long enough, and you'll see the cracks in their walls. I promise you they're there. The guards shoved him back into silence, but the damage was done. His words lingered long after the broadcast ended. Far across the void, Earth was watching. Every transmission, no matter how controlled, was intercepted by Terran intelligence. Each image of Marcus chained yet unyielding spread through military councils like fire on dry fields. At first, the Terran Council had maintained its patience, clinging to the hope that diplomacy might still prevent open war. But patience eroded with each display of Marcus endurance. The Dominion thought they were showcasing their dominance, but all they revealed was that one of Earth's sons had resisted everything they could bring to bear. In a chamber deep beneath the Atlantic Command Hub, Commander Elias Grant studied the grainy footage on a vast holoscreen. He had never met Marcus Dane personally, but he felt he knew him now. The gaunt figure staring down his captors was not just a man. He was a mirror of humanity's oldest instinct, survival in defiance of inevitability. They wanted to humiliate us, Grant muttered, his voice heavy. Around him, senior officers stood at attention, waiting. Instead, they've given us a banner. Enough is enough. Prepare the fleets. The words carried a finality that filled the room with silent assent. There would be no more patience. Earth would not leave its son in chains, nor allow the Dominion to believe that humanity could be toyed with. Back on the Dominion's capital world, Marcus dreamed of nothing so grand as fleets or banners. In the thin hours between torment and spectacle, he thought only of enduring one more day, one more beating, one more sneer from Zorath. He did not know Earth's decision had already been made. Yet deep inside, he trusted it would come. Earth, for all its divisions and quarrels, did not abandon its own. That truth was enough to hold his spirit together. Relker visited his cell once, under the pretense of inspection. He dismissed the guards, claiming he wished to examine the prisoner's condition personally. In the silence that followed, the commander crouched close to the human, studying the stubborn gleam in his eyes. Why do you resist? Relker asked quietly, his tone more curious than cruel. You gain nothing. You suffer endlessly. Why endure? Marcus lifted his head, lips cracked, voice little more than a whisper. Because if I give you what you want, I'm no longer myself. And if I'm not myself, then what's left to fight for? Relker felt the weight of those words sink into him, heavy as stone. He had no answer. The chains clinked as he rose, leaving without another word. But the question lodged within him, corrosive and unyielding. The Dominion continued its charade, broadcasting images of a human brought low. Yet even Zorath could no longer ignore the murmurs filtering in from distant worlds. Soldiers reported unrest in the barracks, slaves resisting in small but multiplying acts of defiance. Every time Marcus spoke, no matter how bloodied or broken, it was another fracture in the Dominion's armor. Zorath roared his fury to the council. If rebellion spreads, I will drown it in fire. Entire colonies will burn for their insolence. But his threats, once absolute, no longer rang with the same power. Fear was crumbling, and the spark had come from a man he still kept alive out of pride. In his private chamber, Relker dared to send a single encrypted transmission through hidden channels. It was short, simple, and dangerous. "If you unleash him, your empire will burn." The message traveled in secret, but Zoreth discovered fragments of it through loyalists. He laughed when he read them, laughter that shook the iron pillars of his throne. "Burn? From one broken human? Let them come. The Dominion has never fallen." But as he laughed, far across the stars, the engines of Earth's fleets ignited, burning like the judgment of a world that had finally run out of patience. The first sign of Earth's fury came not as an announcement, but as silence. Entire Dominion outposts at the edge of their controlled space went dark overnight, communications severed without warning. Patrol fleets dispatched to investigate returned broken, or did not return at all. At first, Zoreth dismissed the reports as exaggerations, the kind of cowardice his officers often cloaked in excuses. But when the Third Frontier stronghold fell without raising so much as a distress beacon, even he began to sense the shift in the air. For centuries, the Dominion had fought species that clawed and hissed, that wailed and pleaded, but never one that struck with such calculated precision. Earth did not bombard cities or slaughter civilians. Instead, they struck with surgical violence, dismantling shipyards, neutralizing garrisons, and erasing fleets in silence. They cut out the heart of the Dominion's strength and left its body to convulse helplessly. Commander Elias Grant stood on the bridge of the Resolute, Earth's flagship, hands clasped behind his back as the viewscreen displayed the wreckage of another Tarkash fleet drifting in silence. His voice was calm, his words measured, but the steel beneath them was unmistakable. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness. We do not come to conquer, only to end this insult. Prepare the next jump. Our diplomat waits." The officers around him moved with the precision of men who understood the stakes. Marcus Dane was alive, still chained somewhere in the Dominion's capital, and Earth would not rest until he was freed. Grant had studied every report, every image of Marcus broadcast across the stars. Each showed a man worn to bone yet unbroken, a defiance so raw that it had become a beacon. Grant felt a strange kinship with him, though they had never met. Marcus fought with words, he fought with fleets, but both were expressions of the same human refusal to bow. On the Dominion throne world, Marcus had heard whispers of the changing tide even in his cell. Guards returned shaken from the front, muttering of human fleets that moved like shadows, of Tarkash warships cut to pieces before they could even fire. Zoreth tried to maintain his air of command, but Marcus saw the cracks in his composure during each forced appearance. There was a new edge to the warlord's voice, not of dominance, but of desperation. "You think your people can save you?" Zoreth sneered one evening as he stood over the chained diplomat. "Let them come. I will line the skies with their corpses. Their fleets will drift alongside the bones of 1,000 failed rebellions." Marcus' lips curled into a faint smile despite the blood on them. "That's the difference between us, Zoreth. You see fleets. I see resolve. And you can't break resolve with threats." Zoreth's tail lashed against the floor, carving grooves into the iron beneath. He left without another word, but Marcus knew the truth. Fear had found its way into the warlord's heart. When Earth's fleet finally breached Dominion space, it was not subtle. The skies above the throne world burned with streaks of fire as Tarkash defenses crumbled before weapons they had underestimated. Human ships were smaller than Dominion cruisers, less imposing to look upon, but every volley of their cannons found its mark, every maneuver cut through Tarkash formations with surgical cruelty. What the Dominion called overwhelming force became wreckage scattered like dust in orbit. Commander Grant led the spearhead personally, his voice steady over the comms. "Strike teams, prepare for ground insertion. Our objective is the diplomat. Everything else is secondary. Let no Tarkash fleet stand in our way." Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, slamming into the city that sprawled like a wound across the land. Soldiers poured out, armored and determined, their weapons cutting through alien defenders with precision. The Dominion had ruled through terror, but terror faltered when met with unshakable resolve. Marcus heard the thunder before he saw the proof. Explosions rumbled through the walls of his cell, dust falling from the ceiling as the ground trembled. For a moment, he wondered if it was another execution staged for the public, but then the heavy door shuddered beneath impacts that were not Tarkash. His heart, so long steeled against disappointment, dared to beat faster. The door burst inward in a spray of sparks. Armored figures stormed through, weapons raised, movements sharp with discipline. At their head strode a man with iron-gray hair and eyes like sharpened steel. Commander Grant lowered his rifle, gaze locking on the prisoner chained to the wall. "Ambassador Dane," he said, voice carrying the weight of relief wrapped in command. "We've come to take you home." For the first time in weeks, Marcus laughed. It was hoarse, broken, yet filled with life. "Took you long enough," he rasped. Grant's men cut the chains, catching Marcus as his legs buckled. He waved them off, forcing himself to stand despite the agony screaming through his body. "Not yet," he said. "Not until it ends. I won't crawl out of here while Zorith still breathes." Grant studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. He understood. This was not just about one man's survival. It was about proving to an empire that humanity could not be bent. The battle for the city raged beyond the cell. Tarkash soldiers fought with desperation, but their lines broke against the precision of Earth's advance. Marcus, draped in a cloak torn from one of his fallen captors, walked beside Grant through the chaos. Everywhere he went, prisoners raised their heads, seeing the man they thought dead now alive, standing tall. His presence was a weapon more potent than rifles. In the central square, as Dominion troops rallied for a counterattack, Marcus stood upon the shattered steps of a monument dedicated to Tarkash conquest. His voice, raw yet unyielding, carried across the plaza. "They tried to break me. You all saw it. Every world saw it. And still I stand. Not because I am strong, but because I refuse to bend. That is humanity. That is freedom. And it can be yours too." The words ignited a spark among the enslaved who had been forced to watch his humiliation for weeks. Chains fell, weapons were seized, and chaos spread through the city, not as disorder, but as uprising. The Dominion soldiers faltered, realizing the crowd they once controlled had turned against them. High Warlord Zorith, from the steps of his fortress, watched his capital unravel. His roars of command did little to restore order. For the first time in his reign, he saw not obedience in the eyes of his soldiers, but doubt. He had promised them dominance eternal, and yet here was proof of its fragility, a single human, surviving where empires had fallen. The Dominion fleet gathered above the planet, their last attempt to crush the invasion. Warships darkened the skies, blotting out the stars. Grant's officers warned him of the odds, but he only straightened, jaw set. Then let the galaxy watch. Today they learn what it means when Earth has had enough. The order was given, and the heavens lit with fire. Earth's ships moved not with brute force, but with precision, every shot a killing stroke, every maneuver a master's hand on the battlefield. Tarkash vessels shattered under the onslaught, their once proud formations collapsing into burning wreckage. The sky became a graveyard of arrogance. On the ground, Marcus felt the tremors of the orbital battle and raised his head. He saw the flames streaking above and understood. Earth had arrived not as a supplicant, but as a reckoning. His people had come not merely to rescue him, but to dismantle the lie of Tarkash supremacy. When the largest Tarkash dreadnought fell, its carcass tearing across the sky in a streak of fire, the plaza erupted in cheers from those who had once been silent. Slaves, soldiers, and civilians alike saw the impossible unfold before their eyes, the Dominion bleeding, broken, humbled. Marcus turned to Grant, his body frail, but his spirit burning brighter than ever. "This isn't just about me anymore," he said. "It never was. This is about showing them that humanity will never be chained." Grant's reply was quiet, almost reverent. "And the galaxy will remember it." The section closed with the city still burning, the Dominion reeling, and Zorith retreating into the depths of his fortress. He was not yet defeated, but for the first time, the warlord felt the weight of inevitability pressing down upon him. The human he could not kill had become the herald of his empire's unraveling, and the storm was only beginning. Smoke still hung in the air as Marcus Dane stood in the square that had once been the heart of Zoratha's empire. The embers of rebellion flickered in the streets, carried by men and women who had spent lifetimes in chains, but now raised their fists in defiance. Earth's soldiers secured the city with relentless precision, but Marcus knew the war was not yet won. Somewhere within the fortress looming over the horizon, Zorath remained. And Marcus understood, with a clarity that burned in his chest, that until the warlord fell, the Dominion's shadow would not vanish. Commander Elias Grant approached, his armor scorched from battle, eyes hardened but alive. "We've secured most of the capital," he reported, his voice clipped yet edged with restrained pride. "The fleet is driving the last of their ships into retreat. But Zorath hasn't surfaced. He'll make his stand in that fortress." Marcus straightened despite the exhaustion weighing down his body. His frame was gaunt, his movements unsteady, but his gaze was unwavering. "Then that's where this ends. He put me on display to prove humanity could be broken. We'll finish this in front of him, where his people can watch their lie crumble." Grant studied him, torn between duty and admiration. The diplomat had endured where soldiers might have failed, wielding nothing but words and defiance. Grant had fought wars his entire life, but standing beside Marcus, he realized the true weight of leadership lay not in command, but in conviction. "Very well," Grant said at last. "We end this together." The assault on Zoratha's fortress was unlike any battle before. The walls were carved from black stone that had withstood centuries of war, bristling with weapons powered by energy reserves buried deep within the planet itself. Tarkash defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew their world was collapsing, and Earth's soldiers cut through them step by step, every hall contested, every chamber soaked in fire and steel. Marcus walked among the soldiers, refusing to be carried, every step a declaration of his will. He spoke to them as they moved, his voice raw but steady. "You fight not just for Earth, but for every voice that has been silenced. Remember that. Remember that the galaxy is watching, and today they will see that humanity does not bow." The words struck deeper than any order. Soldiers straightened their backs, their movement sharper, their fire more precise. Grant saw it too. Marcus was no longer merely a diplomat. He was becoming the embodiment of resistance itself. At the fortress gates, the final barrier stood tall, reinforced steel that had resisted centuries of siege. Explosives were placed, the countdown ticking like a heartbeat. Marcus watched the numbers fall, each second dragging him closer to the reckoning. When the gates finally erupted in a storm of fire and smoke, the roar of humanity surged forward into the heart of the Dominion. Zorath awaited them in the throne chamber, clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed like molten iron, his massive frame towering above all others. The chamber itself was vast, designed to magnify his presence, its walls lined with the banners of countless conquered worlds. Now those banners hung tattered, symbols of an empire fraying at the edges. The warlord's voice thundered across the chamber. "You dare bring your filth into my hall? You think your rebellion will survive? I am Zorath, heir to Dominion Eternal, and I will grind your species into ash." Grant raised his rifle, but Marcus placed a hand on his arm. "This isn't just about killing him," Marcus whispered. "It's about proving he can bleed." He stepped forward, limping, yet every stride carried more weight than a battalion. Zoratha's eyes narrowed, rage burning at the sight of the man he had failed to break. "You," the warlord hissed, his voice venom. "You should be dead." "I should," Marcus admitted, his voice steady despite the tremor in his body. "But I'm not. And that terrifies you more than any fleet in orbit. Because you've built your empire on fear, and I've already taken that from you." The chamber fell silent, Tarkash guards shifting uneasily as the words echoed. Marcus' presence struck harder than the rifles surrounding him, his defiance unraveling the myth of Zoratha's invincibility. With a roar, Zorath charged, a mountain of fury and steel. Grant moved to intercept, but Marcus raised a hand. "He's mine." Grant hesitated only a moment before stepping back, trusting in the strength that had carried Marcus this far. The clash was brutal. Zorth swung with a strength that could shatter stone, but Marcus evaded with the precision of a man who had survived on instinct alone. Pain coursed through every fiber of his being, yet he refused to fall. Each strike he endured, each dodge he managed, carried with it not just his survival, but the weight of every soul who had ever bowed beneath Tarkash rule. Grant's soldiers held their fire. The chamber transformed into an arena where the fate of empires hung on a single confrontation. Zorth's blows grew wilder, desperation seeping into his movements. Marcus, bleeding and trembling, saw the cracks forming. He remembered every lash, every humiliation, every speech forced upon him. And he gathered them into a single truth: the warlord could not break what would not bend. When the moment came, Marcus seized it. Zorth swung high, overextending, and Marcus drove forward with the strength of defiance itself, slamming a broken chain, the last remnant of his captivity, into the warlord's throat. The weapon was crude, but it carried all the fury of the unbroken. Zorth staggered, choking, and Marcus forced him to his knees. The chamber erupted in silence, every Tarkash soldier frozen, as their unyielding warlord bowed not by choice, but by inevitability. Marcus leaned close, his voice a rasp but sharp as a blade. "You thought breaking me would break humanity, but all you've broken is yourself." He drove the chain tighter until Zorth collapsed, his body striking the stone floor with a finality that reverberated through the chamber. The banners above trembled, and with them the last illusion of Dominion supremacy. For a long moment no one moved. Then, slowly, Tarkash soldiers dropped their weapons, their gazes shifting not to the fallen warlord, but to the man who had defied him. The chamber filled not with roars of rage, but with the quiet, undeniable sound of surrender. Grant approached, standing beside Marcus, as the diplomat swayed from exhaustion but refused to fall. "It's over," Grant said quietly. Marcus shook his head, his voice soft but resolute.
"No."
"This is the beginning. The galaxy has seen what humanity does when pushed too far. They'll remember. They'll rise. And they'll know," his voice faltered, but his eyes still burned. "They'll know we don't yield." Outside, the skies cleared as the last Dominion ships fled or surrendered. The fortress gates, once symbols of Tarkash might, now stood shattered, and the enslaved of countless worlds poured into the streets to celebrate their first taste of freedom. In the square, where Marcus had once been chained and displayed as a warning, Earth's banner was raised. Not as a mark of conquest, but as a symbol of defiance that had kindled hope across the stars. Grant placed a steadying hand on Marcus' shoulder. "You've done more than survive, Ambassador. You've become the proof that we are damned hard to kill." Marcus allowed himself a faint smile, though exhaustion threatened to claim him. "Not damned, Commander. Just human."
And that was enough.
As the cheers of liberation thundered through the capital, Marcus Dane stood at the center, scarred and battered, but unbroken. Around him, an empire crumbled, and a new future began, one forged not by conquest, but by the stubborn, unyielding will of a species that refused to bow. And across the stars, whispered in awe and fear alike, the words spread from world to world. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy would never be the same.